A poor virgin girl was left to die in the desert until a wounded Apache chief carried her home. Clara Bell lay face down in the burning sand, her torn dress clinging to her trembling body like a shroud. The rope burns around her wrists had turned crimson, and her lips were already cracking from thirst. She'd been there since dawn, abandoned by the very people who promised to protect her. 3 hours earlier, she had trusted the wrong man. Samuel Crenshaw had offered to help her escape the forced marriage her guardian had arranged. He'd promised safe passage to the next town, a chance at freedom. But when they reached the desert's edge, everything changed. Samuel's gentle smile turned cold as stone when she refused his advances. "You think you're too good for me?" he had snarled, grabbing her wrists with hands that felt like iron. "Let's see how proud you are when the sun finds you." He'd tied her to a dead mesquite tree and rode away, leaving her with nothing but the scorching sun and her own terror. Clara had screamed until her voice gave out. She'd pulled at the ropes until her wrists bled. Now she could only wait for death to claim her. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction. Heat waves danced across the barren landscape like phantoms, mocking her desperation. Vultures circled overhead, patient and knowing. Clara closed her eyes and tried to pray, but even hope seemed to evaporate in this god-forsaken place. But Clara didn't know that less than a mile away, someone else was fighting for survival, someone who would change everything. Ayanna, war chief of the mountain Apache, pressed his hand against the arrow wound in his shoulder. Blood seeped between his fingers as he guided his horse toward the waterhole he knew lay hidden among the rocks. The ambush had come at dawn. Soldiers from the fort had violated the treaty again, attacking his hunting party without warning. 3 of his warriors were dead. 2 more were wounded. And now Ayanna rode alone, his vision blurring from blood loss, desperate to reach safety. His horse stumbled, nearly throwing him from the saddle. The animal was as exhausted as he was, foam gathering at its mouth. They wouldn't make it much farther without water. Ayanna squinted through the heat shimmer, searching for the familiar rock formations that marked the spring. That's when he saw her, a figure in white, motionless against a dead tree. At first, he thought it was a mirage. The desert played cruel tricks on dying men, but as he drew closer, he could see the rise and fall of breathing. Someone was alive out there. Every instinct told him to ride past. His people and the white settlers were enemies. This could be a trap. His wound was serious, and he needed to reach his village before infection set in. But something made him pull his horse to a stop. The girl couldn't be more than 17. Her dark hair was matted with sweat and sand. The ropes around her wrists told a story of betrayal that Ayanna recognized all too well. He'd seen his own people left to die by those they trusted. Clara's eyes fluttered open as a shadow fell across her face. She expected to see vultures, but instead found herself staring up at a man unlike any she'd ever seen. His skin was bronze from years in the sun, his black hair hanging loose around a face marked by both wisdom and pain. Blood stained his buckskin shirt, and his dark eyes held a depth that made her forget to breathe. For a moment, neither moved. The Apache chief and the abandoned girl studied each other across a gulf of fear and mistrust. Clara had heard the stories about his people, tales of violence and savagery that white mothers used to frighten their children. But the man looking down at her didn't match those stories. Ayanna saw something in her eyes that surprised him. Not hatred or terror, but a recognition of shared suffering. This girl knew what it meant to be betrayed, to be left broken by those who should have protected her. He could ride away. Should ride away. His own survival depended on reaching his village. But as Clara's cracked lips tried to form words, as her eyes pleaded for mercy she had no right to expect, Ayanna made a choice that would bind their fates together. He dismounted slowly, his wound screaming in protest. Clara watched in stunned silence as the Apache chief knelt beside her and began working at the knots around her wrists. His touch was gentle, careful not to cause more pain to her raw skin. But what neither of them knew was that Samuel Crenshaw hadn't ridden as far as they thought. And when he saw the Apache chief freeing his discarded prize, everything was about to become much more dangerous. The ropes fell away from Clara's wrists, but her relief was short-lived. Ayanna's head snapped up, his warrior instinct sensing danger before his ears caught the sound. Hoofbeats, coming fast from the direction of town. "Can you stand?" His English was clear but accented, each word carefully chosen. Clara tried to rise, but her legs buckled. Hours in the desert heat had drained what little strength she'd possessed. Without hesitation, Ayanna lifted her into his arms. The movement sent fire through his wounded shoulder, but he gritted his teeth and carried her toward his horse. Clara felt the strength in his arms, the steady rhythm of his breathing, and something inside her that had been broken began to mend. 3 riders, Ayanna muttered, scanning the horizon. They see us. Clara's blood turned to ice. She knew who was coming. Samuel hadn't been content to let the desert claim her. He'd returned with help, probably telling the others that she'd been taken by hostiles. It would be his word against theirs, and no one would believe an Apache chief over a white man. "They'll kill you," she whispered. "Samuel told them I was kidnapped. They won't listen to the truth." Ayanna's jaw tightened. He'd survived 35 years by reading danger in men's faces, and he could see the hunger for violence in these approaching riders. They wanted Apache blood, and any excuse would do. His horse was exhausted, he was wounded, and the girl could barely stand. Running wasn't an option. Fighting 3 armed men in his condition would be suicide. But surrender meant death for both of them. "What's your name?" he asked as he helped Clara onto his horse. "Clara Bell," she managed, her voice hoarse from thirst. "Clara Bell," he repeated, as if testing how the words felt. "I am Ayanna. If we die today, at least we won't die as strangers." The riders were close enough now that Clara could make out Samuel's face beneath his hat brim. He was smiling, and that smile made her stomach turn. Beside him rode 2 men she recognized from town, Marcus Webb and Dutch Kellerman, both known for their hatred of the Apache and their quick trigger fingers. Samuel raised his hand, signaling the others to slow down. They formed a semicircle around Ayanna and Clara, their weapons drawn but not yet aimed. The game hadn't started yet, but everyone knew the rules. "Well, well," Samuel called out, his voice carrying clearly in the desert air. "Looks like we found ourselves an Indian trying to steal white women. That's a hanging offense where I come from." Ayanna said nothing. He kept his hands visible, away from the knife at his belt. Clara felt his tension, the coiled energy of a predator forced to play prey. "She ain't stolen," Marcus spat, tobacco juice staining his beard. "Look at her, all torn up and scared. Apache probably had his way with her already." Clara's face burned with shame and rage. "That's not true. He saved me. Samuel, tell them what you did." Samuel's laugh was cold as winter wind. "Poor thing's been in the sun too long, talking nonsense. Everyone knows you can't trust what a woman says when she's been through trauma like this." Dutch nodded gravely. "Terrible thing what these savages do to Christian women. Put her out of her misery, probably be a mercy." The words hit Clara like physical blows. They weren't just planning to kill Ayanna. They were going to murder her too and claim it was justice. She could see it in their eyes, the way they looked at her now, like she was already dead, already stained beyond saving. "You're lying," she said, but her voice carried no strength. Who would believe her? A poor orphan girl with no family, no protection, no value to anyone. Ayanna shifted slightly, positioning himself between Clara and the guns. She felt his hand brush against hers, warm and steady. In that touch she found something she'd never had before, someone willing to die for her. "The girl speaks truth," Ayanna said quietly. "I found her tied to the tree. She was left to die." Samuel's face darkened. "You calling me a liar, Chief? I call you what you are." The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Clara could hear her heart pounding, could smell the sweat and leather and metallic scent of weapons ready to kill. 3 men against 1 wounded Apache and a helpless girl. The odds couldn't be worse. But Samuel wasn't satisfied with simple murder. He wanted to play with his prey first. "Tell you what, Chief," he said, dismounting slowly. "You let the girl go. Ride out of here peaceful-like, and maybe we let you live. She comes with us. We take her back to town where she belongs. Everyone wins." Clara felt Ayanna's muscles tense. They both knew what taking her back to town really meant. Samuel would claim she'd been rescued, traumatized, in need of his protection. And with no family to object, no one to speak for her, she'd disappear into whatever hell he had planned. "The girl stays with me," Ayanna said. Samuel's smile widened. "Now that's interesting. Apache chief getting attached to white girls. Makes a man wonder what other crimes you've been up to." Marcus and Dutch spread out wider, closing off any escape route. Their horses snorted and pawed the ground, sensing the violence that was coming. Clara realized with crystal clarity that she was about to watch the only person who'd ever tried to save her die because of her. The thought was unbearable. She opened her mouth to tell Ayanna to leave her, to save himself while he could. But before she could speak, something unexpected happened. Something that would change everything once again. A rifle shot cracked across the desert, but it didn't come from Samuel or his men. The bullet struck the sand between the horses, sending them dancing sideways in panic. Everyone spun toward the sound, weapons swinging wildly as they searched for the shooter. On a ridge 50 yards away, a figure stood silhouetted against the burning sky. Even at this distance, Clara could see the glint of a rifle barrel and the distinctive outline of Apache war dress. Ayana's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Nalnish," he called out in his native tongue. "Brother." The voice that answered was strong and carried the authority of command. "Ayana, are you harmed?" Samuel's face went white as he realized their situation had just become impossible. One wounded Apache was manageable, but if there were more warriors on the ridge, if this was a war party, how many? Dutch whispered, his gun hand shaking. Ayana spoke again in Apache, his words flowing like water over stone. Clara couldn't understand the language, but she could hear the steel beneath the calm tones. This wasn't a conversation. It was a negotiation for their lives. The warrior on the ridge responded, and Clara caught something that sounded like questioning. Ayana glanced down at her, then spoke again, his voice carrying a note of finality. "What's he saying?" Marcus demanded, sweat beading on his forehead despite the heat. Ayana's dark eyes fixed on Samuel. "I told my brother that these men left a young woman to die in the desert. I told him that one of them tried to force himself on her when she refused his advances." Samuel's hand moved toward his gun. "That's a damn lie. I told him," Ayana continued, his voice never rising, "that this man tied her to a tree and left her for the vultures because she would not submit to his desires." The warrior on the ridge spoke again, and this time Clara could hear the anger in his voice even without understanding the words. Samuel had gone gray, finally grasping the full horror of his position. "And what did your brother say to that?" Clara asked softly. Ayana's smile was sharp as a blade. "He said that among my people, men who abuse women in such ways are not considered men at all. They are considered animals, and animals are hunted." The rifle on the ridge swung toward Samuel. Dutch and Marcus began backing their horses away, clearly deciding that their loyalty to Samuel had limits. "Now wait just a minute," Samuel sputtered. "You can't believe the word of some hysterical girl over the word of a man who left her tied to die?" Ayana interrupted. "Clarabelle, show them your wrists." Clara raised her hands, displaying the raw rope burns that circled her wrists like bloody bracelets. The evidence was undeniable, written in her own blood and pain. "Those could have come from anywhere," Samuel said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Remove your shirt," Ayana ordered Clara gently. Clara's eyes widened in shock. I couldn't. Trust me." With trembling fingers, Clara pulled aside the torn fabric of her dress, revealing her shoulders and back. Samuel's handiwork was clearly visible, finger-shaped bruises where he'd grabbed her, scratches from when she'd fought him off. Marcus cursed under his breath. Dutch spat in the sand and shook his head. Even they had limits, and Samuel had clearly crossed them. "Jesus, Sam," Marcus muttered. "What the hell did you do?" Samuel's composure finally cracked. "She's nothing, a nobody. An orphan with no family, no protection. Who's going to miss her?" The words hung in the desert air like a confession. Clara felt tears burning her eyes, not from pain but from rage. He'd just confirmed everything Ayana had said, validated every accusation, but Samuel wasn't finished digging his own grave. "Besides," he continued, desperation making him reckless, "what's one less mouth to feed? The girl's been nothing but trouble since her parents died. At least this way she'd have been useful for something." The rifle shot from the ridge came so close to Samuel's head that it singed the hair beneath his hat brim. His horse reared, nearly throwing him from the saddle. "Next shot won't miss," Ayana called out in English, his voice carrying to the ridge. Samuel was trapped, and he knew it, but cornered animals were often the most dangerous. Samuel's hand moved to his gun with the desperate speed of a man with nothing left to lose. "If I'm going down, I'm taking her with me." The pistol cleared his holster, swinging toward Clara. Time seemed to slow as she stared down the black barrel of death. She could see Samuel's finger tightening on the trigger, could see the madness in his eyes. But Ayana was faster. Despite his wound, despite the exhaustion, the Apache chief moved with the fluid grace of a born warrior. His knife left its sheath in a silver arc, spinning end over end through the scorching air. The blade struck Samuel's wrist with surgical precision. His scream echoed across the desert as the gun tumbled from nerveless fingers, discharging harmlessly into the sand. Blood poured from the wound as he clutched his injured hand to his chest. My wrist! He cut clean through my wrist! Marcus and Dutch sat frozen in their saddles, finally understanding that they were completely outmatched. This wasn't just a wounded Apache. This was a war chief, a man who'd survived countless battles through skill and instinct. If you were Clara, what would you do? Stay silent and let others decide your fate, or speak up and demand justice for what Samuel did to you? Tell me in the comments. I need to know which side you'd choose. Because what Clara decided next would determine whether she lived as a victim or died as a warrior. Clara's voice cut through Samuel's screams like thunder. I want him to know what it feels like. Ayanna looked at her with new respect. The broken girl who'd been tied to a tree was gone. In her place sat someone harder, someone who'd found strength in the depths of betrayal. What are you talking about? Samuel gasped, still bleeding. Clara slid down from Ayanna's horse, her legs steadier now. You left me to die alone. You wanted me to know fear, to know helplessness. Now it's your turn. Clara Belle, Ayanna said quietly. What do you ask of me? Tie him to that tree, the same way he tied me. Let him feel the sun, let him know thirst. Let him understand what he tried to do to me. Marcus and Dutch exchanged glances. This wasn't what they'd signed up for. They'd come expecting a simple rescue, maybe some Apache killing. They hadn't counted on witnessing Samuel's crimes, hadn't expected to feel sick about their own participation. Now hold on, Dutch said. We can't just leave a white man tied up for the vultures. Why not? Clara's voice was steady as stone. He left a white woman tied up for them. What makes his life worth more than mine? The question hung in the air like a challenge to everything they'd been taught about the value of human life. Samuel was white, male, property-owning. By every measure their society used, he should matter more than an orphan girl. But looking at Clara's rope-burned wrists, at the bruises on her shoulders, those measures felt hollow. Ayanna spoke to his brother on the ridge. The warrior responded, and Ayanna nodded. Nalnish says 3 more of our people come. They will be here soon. You have until then to decide what justice looks like. Samuel's face went ashen. You can't do this. I have rights. I'm a citizen. I own land. You have what you gave me. Clara interrupted. Nothing. The truth of it hit Samuel like a physical blow. Everything he'd said about her applied to him now. He was alone, unprotected, at the mercy of people he'd wronged. For the first time in his life, Samuel Crenshaw understood what it meant to be powerless. Please, he whispered. I'll make it right. I'll tell everyone what really happened. I'll confess to the sheriff. You'll what? Clara's laugh was bitter. You'll tell them you tried to rape an orphan and left her to die when she fought back? You think they'll punish you for that? You think anyone will care about justice for someone like me? Samuel opened his mouth, then closed it. They both knew she was right. In a world where women like Clara had no value, men like Samuel faced no consequences. But this wasn't that world anymore. This was the desert, where different laws applied, where an Apache chief could be judge and jury, where a broken girl could demand her own justice. Marcus finally found his voice. What do you want from us? Clara looked at the 2 men who'd ridden out expecting to be heroes. I want you to ride back to town. I want you to tell them exactly what you saw here. Tell them Samuel Crenshaw confessed to attacking me. Tell them he tried to kill me when I refused him. And then what? Dutch asked. Then you forget you ever saw me alive. The implications hit them both at once. Clara wasn't just demanding justice for Samuel's crimes. She was planning to disappear entirely, to walk away from a world that had never wanted her anyway. But as the sound of approaching hoofbeats grew louder, as more Apache warriors appeared on the horizon, Clara realized that her plan might be more complicated than she'd thought, because Ayanna was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read, and something in his eyes suggested that her story was far from over. 3 Apache warriors crested the ridge, their horses moving like shadows across the burning landscape. Clara watched them approach, her heart hammering against her ribs. These weren't the savage monsters from the stories white mothers told their children. These were men of dignity and purpose, their faces marked by the same quiet strength she'd seen in Ayanna. The lead warrior spoke rapidly to Ayanna in their native tongue. Clara caught the questioning tone, the concern for their chief's wound. Ayanna responded, gesturing toward Samuel, then toward Clara. The warrior's eyes hardened as they took in her injuries. The rope burns, the obvious signs of violence. What are they saying? Marcus whispered, his voice tight with fear. They're deciding whether you live or die, Ayanna said simply. Dutch's horse pranced nervously beneath him. We didn't do nothing to the girl. That was all Samuel. You rode with him. You came here to kill me for saving her. In their eyes, you share his guilt. Clara felt the weight of their stares, the desperate hope in Marcus and Dutch's faces. These men had been ready to murder her an hour ago, had called her worthless, contaminated. Now they begged for mercy from the very people they'd been taught to despise. The lead warrior dismounted and approached Samuel, who was still clutching his wounded wrist. Blood had soaked through his shirt, and his face was gray with pain and terror. The Apache studied him with the same expression a hunter might use to examine a wounded animal. Naalnish asks what punishment fits this crime, Ayana translated. Among our people, men who abuse women are made to feel the same helplessness they inflicted. Samuel's voice cracked. I'll do anything. I'll give you money, horses, whatever you want. What I want, Clara said, stepping forward, is for you to understand that I'm not nothing, that I matter, that what you did to me was wrong. If you're enjoying the story, subscribe to the channel. Samuel looked up at her, really looked, perhaps for the first time since they'd met. He saw the strength in her bearing, the fire in her eyes that hours of torture hadn't extinguished. For a moment, something that might have been shame flickered across his features. I didn't think. You didn't think I was human, Clara finished. You saw something you could use and throw away. But I'm still here, still breathing, still worth something. The Apache warriors spoke among themselves, their voices low and serious. Clara couldn't understand the words, but she could feel the weight of judgment in their tone. These men had seen enough injustice to recognize it when they found it. Ayana swayed slightly in his saddle, and Clara realized his wound was worse than she'd thought. Dark blood had soaked through the crude bandage, and his breathing was becoming labored. He needed medical attention, needed to reach his village before infection set in. You're hurt, she said, moving to his side. You should go. Let me deal with Samuel. Ayana looked down at her, and in his eyes she saw something that made her breath catch. Respect, admiration, and something deeper, more dangerous. Something that suggested he wasn't planning to leave her behind. You would come with us? He asked quietly. The question hung in the desert air like a challenge to everything Clara had ever known. Leave the white world that had never wanted her? Join a people she'd been taught to fear? Trade one uncertain future for another? But before she could answer, Naalnish spoke sharply, pointing toward the horizon. More riders were coming from the direction of town, a lot more. Soldiers, Ayana breathed. Samuel's bloody face split into a triumphant grin. I told the sheriff where I was going. Told him I might need backup if there was trouble with hostiles. The trap was closing. In minutes, they'd be surrounded by cavalry, outnumbered and outgunned. Clara looked at Ayana, at the warriors who'd risked their lives to save a white girl they didn't know. She thought about the choice before her, about the two worlds pulling her in different directions. And then she made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. Clara grabbed Samuel's fallen pistol from the sand, checking the chambers with steady hands. 4 bullets left. She'd watched her father clean his weapons enough times to know how they worked. What are you doing? Ayana asked, but there was understanding in his voice. Buying you time to escape. Clara's voice was calm, resolved. When those soldiers arrive, they'll find me holding Samuel at gunpoint. I'll tell them he attacked me, that I got away and captured him myself. They'll never believe you overpowered him alone, Dutch protested. Clara smiled grimly. They'll believe what they want to believe. A white girl heroically defending herself sounds better than an Apache war chief saving her from white men. Samuel's eyes widened with panic. You can't. I'll tell them the truth. Will you? Clara pressed the gun barrel against his temple. You'll confess to attempted rape? To leaving me tied up to die? You think that makes you look better? The approaching hoofbeats were getting louder. Clara could see dust clouds rising from multiple horses, at least a dozen riders. The cavalry was coming in force, expecting a fight. Ayana struggled to dismount, his wound bleeding freely now. I will not leave you to face this alone. Yes, you will. Clara's voice carried the authority of someone who'd finally found her purpose. Because if you stay, we all die. If you go, at least some of us live. Naalnish spoke urgently to Ayana, gesturing toward the approaching soldiers. The other warriors were already preparing to retreat, their horses dancing with nervous energy. Clara Belle, Ayana said quietly. There is something you should know. What? In my language, your name means clear water in the desert. It means hope when there should be none. The words hit her like a physical blow. She'd spent her entire life believing she was worthless, unwanted, nothing. But this man, this Apache chief who barely knew her, saw her as hope itself. "I can't go with you," she whispered. "I don't belong in your world any more than I belonged in theirs. You belong wherever you choose to belong." The soldiers were close now, their voices carrying across the desert. Clara could hear their sergeant calling out orders, positioning his men for whatever they might find. "Go!" she ordered. "All of you. Now." Marcus and Dutch didn't need to be told twice. They spurred their horses toward town, racing to put distance between themselves and the coming confrontation. But Ayanna remained, his dark eyes fixed on Clara's face. "When this is over," he said, "when you have dealt with the white man's justice, you will always have a place with my people. Always." "How can you say that? You don't even know me. I know that you chose to save my life when you could have saved yourself. I know that you faced 3 armed men without flinching. I know that you demand justice instead of revenge." Ayanna's voice was growing weaker, but his words carried absolute conviction. "These things tell me who you are." The first soldiers appeared on the ridge, their blue uniforms stark against the red stone. Clara raised the pistol, making sure they could see her holding Samuel at gunpoint. "Go!" she shouted. Finally, reluctantly, Ayanna allowed Nalnish to help him onto his horse. The Apache warriors melted into the landscape like smoke, disappearing among the rocks and shadows with the skill of men born to this harsh land. Clara was alone again, but this time it felt different. This time she'd chosen her solitude. "Help!" she called out to the approaching soldiers. "This man attacked me. I've got him." Sergeant McKinnon was the first to reach them, his weathered face grim with suspicion. Behind him rode a dozen cavalry troopers, their carbines ready for trouble. "Miss, are you all right?" Clara let tears flow down her cheeks, not entirely forced. "He tied me up, left me to die. I managed to get free when he came back, got his gun away from him." Samuel tried to speak, but Clara pressed the pistol harder against his skull. "One word and I'll show them what you tried to do to me." The sergeant dismounted, approaching carefully. "Let me take the weapon, miss. You're safe now." Clara handed over the gun, watching as 2 soldiers grabbed Samuel and bound his hands. He was saying something about Apache, about being attacked, but his story made no sense. A wounded man babbling about savages while a young woman stood over him with his own weapon. "What's your name, miss?" McKinnon asked gently. "Clara Bell. I have no family, no guardian. This man offered to help me find work in the next town, but when we got to the desert," she let her voice trail off, indicating the rope burns on her wrists. McKinnon's face darkened as he examined her injuries. "Son of a bitch. Pardon my language, miss. Will he hang for this? If there's any justice in this world, he will." But Clara had learned something important in the desert heat. Justice wasn't something that happened to you. It was something you made for yourself, by the choices you made, and the strength you found in the darkest moments. As the soldiers prepared to ride back to town, Clara looked toward the rocks where Ayanna had disappeared. Somewhere out there, a wounded Apache chief was riding toward his village, carrying her memory with him, and somehow she knew their paths would cross again. The trial lasted 3 days. Clara sat in the front row of the makeshift courthouse, watching Samuel's lawyer try to paint her as a confused, traumatized girl who couldn't remember events clearly. But the rope burns on her wrist told a story no amount of legal maneuvering could erase. Marcus and Dutch testified reluctantly, admitting they'd found Samuel with a knife wound and Clara holding his gun. They spoke carefully, editing out any mention of Apache warriors, but their discomfort was obvious. Men who'd ridden out expecting to be heroes had returned as witnesses to a crime that sickened them. Judge Harrison was a hard man, who'd seen enough frontier justice to recognize truth when he heard it. Samuel's claims about being attacked by hostiles fell apart under questioning. Why would Apache warriors leave him alive? Why would they give a white woman his own gun? Why were there no other wounds except the precisely placed cut on his wrist? "The evidence suggests," Judge Harrison declared, "that Miss Clara Bell defended herself against an attempted assault. Mr. Crenshaw, you are hereby sentenced to hang by the neck until dead." Samuel screamed as they dragged him away, still claiming innocence, still insisting that savage Indians had attacked him. But his words fell on deaf ears. The town had heard enough lies from Samuel Crenshaw. Clara felt no satisfaction in his sentence. Justice had been served, but it felt hollow somehow. Samuel would die, but that wouldn't undo what he'd tried to do to her. It wouldn't erase the hours she'd spent tied to that tree. Certain she would die alone and forgotten. After the trial, people treated her differently. Some with pity, some with respect she'd never experienced before. The hotel owner offered her a job as a cook. The dressmaker said she needed an assistant. For the first time in her life, Clara Bell had options. But as the days passed, she found herself walking to the edge of town, staring out at the desert where everything had changed. The other townsfolk thought she was traumatized, that she was reliving her ordeal. They didn't understand that she was listening for something they couldn't hear. 2 weeks after the trial, she heard it. Hoofbeats in the night, moving slowly, carefully. Clara slipped out of the hotel and made her way to the desert's edge, her heart racing with anticipation and fear. Ayanna sat on his horse in the moonlight, his wound healed enough for travel. He looked healthier, stronger, but his eyes held the same intensity that had captured her from the first moment. "You came back," she whispered. "I said you would always have a place with my people. I meant it." Clara looked back at the town where she'd finally found acceptance, then at the Apache chief who'd risked everything to save her. 2 worlds, 2 futures, pulling her in different directions. "If I come with you, there's no going back. Your people and mine will always be enemies." "Not always," Ayanna said quietly. "Perhaps someday, when others see what I see in you, they will understand that strength has no color, that courage belongs to anyone brave enough to claim it." Clara thought about the girl who'd been tied to a tree, waiting to die. That girl was gone, burned away by desert heat and forged into something harder, something unbreakable. She thought about the choice before her, safety and acceptance in a world that had never valued her, or uncertainty and adventure with people who saw her worth. She thought about what Ayanna had told her. "You belong wherever you choose to belong. Will you teach me your language?" she asked. His smile was answer enough. Clara walked forward, accepting the hand he offered, letting him pull her up onto his horse. Behind them, the town slept peacefully, never knowing that one of their own was riding away into legend. But as they disappeared into the desert night, neither Clara nor Ayanna noticed the figure watching from the shadows, someone who would make sure their story didn't end with a simple escape into the wilderness. 6 months later, Clara Bell had become someone entirely new. Her skin was bronze from desert sun, her hands strong from learning Apache ways. She could track game, read weather in cloud formations, and speak Ayanna's language with growing fluency. The Apache women had accepted her slowly, testing her resolve, but they'd eventually embraced her as one of their own. She and Ayanna had married according to Apache custom, their union blessed by elders who saw how they strengthened each other. Clara had found not just love, but purpose. She helped negotiate with white traders, her unique position allowing her to bridge 2 worlds that desperately needed understanding. But the past had a way of finding you, even in the most remote places. Marcus Webb rode into the Apache camp under a white flag, his face haggard with exhaustion and fear. Clara recognized him immediately, though she'd hoped never to see any reminder of her old life again. Clara," he stammered, dismounting carefully. "I need to talk to you. Both of you." Ayanna emerged from their dwelling, his hand resting on his knife handle. "You are not welcome here, white man. Please, it's about Samuel." Clara felt ice form in her stomach. "Samuel is dead. We watched them hang him." Marcus shook his head grimly. That's what they wanted everyone to think. But Samuel had friends, people with money and influence. They broke him out the night before the execution, made it look like he'd escaped and been shot trying to flee. But he's alive, and he's gathering men. "What kind of men?" Ayanna asked. "The worst kind. Men who've lost everything, who blame Indians for all their troubles. Men who think killing Apache will solve their problems." Marcus's voice was tight with fear. "Samuel's told them that you stole his woman, that you're planning raids on white settlements. He's convinced them that a preemptive strike is necessary." Clara's blood turned cold. "How many men?" 40, maybe 50. Well-armed, well-supplied. They're calling themselves the Desert Rangers, claiming they're protecting civilization from savage attacks. Ayanna's jaw tightened. "When do they move?" "Soon, maybe days. Samuel knows these mountains, knows where your people camp. He's planning to attack at dawn, when your warriors are spread out hunting." The implications hit Clara like physical blows. Because of her, because she'd chosen love over safety, Samuel was bringing war to innocent people. Children would die. Elders who'd never harmed anyone would be slaughtered. All because she dared to find happiness with a man her own people considered an enemy. "Why are you telling us this?" she asked. "Why warn us?" Marcus looked ashamed. "Because I was there when Samuel tied you to that tree. I was ready to let him kill you to protect my own skin. I've been living with that shame for 6 months, knowing I was a coward when you needed help. And now? Now I'm trying to be the man I should have been then." Ayana spoke rapidly to his warriors in Apache. Clara caught enough to understand. Prepare defenses, gather the tribe, send runners to allied bands. But they both knew the truth. Against 50 well-armed white men, the small Apache band couldn't win a direct confrontation. "There might be another way," Clara said quietly. Both men looked at her. "Samuel isn't doing this for justice or protection. He's doing it for revenge against me. If I surrender myself, if I go back with Marcus, maybe Samuel will call off the attack." "No," Ayana's voice was absolute. "I will not trade your life for temporary peace. But if it saves your people, my people include you now. We face this threat together, or not at all." Clara felt tears sting her eyes. In her old world, she'd been expendable, worthless. Here she was valued beyond her ability to sacrifice herself for others. "Then we fight," she said. "Then we fight," Ayana agreed. Marcus looked between them, seeing the resolve in their faces. "There's something else. Something Samuel doesn't know." "What?" "I wasn't the only one with a conscience. Dutch and 3 others from the original group, we've been watching Samuel, trying to figure out how to stop him. When he moves against you, we'll be ready." The battle for Clara Bell's freedom had become something larger, a fight for the right to choose love over hatred, understanding over prejudice. As the Apache camp prepared for war, Clara realized that her story had become part of something bigger than herself. The poor girl who'd been left to die in the desert was gone forever. In her place stood a woman who'd learned that sometimes the greatest courage was simply refusing to let others decide your worth. Samuel Crenshaw wanted war. He would get one, but not the kind he was expecting. If you're enjoying the story, subscribe to the channel. The final confrontation would test everything Clara had learned about strength, love, and the price of freedom. Because some battles weren't just about surviving, they were about proving that everyone deserved the right to choose their own destiny. Now click on the video on the screen to hear a story even more powerful than this one. With courage so raw and justice so fierce, you'll feel it in your bones. The next tale will show you what happens when the innocent fight back with everything they have. Click on the video now.